From 74 period exchanges in 2005 to about over 5,000, as at July 2021. Most certainly something that the CBN considers very, very touching and needs to be dealt with. What are the pros? What are the cons? How does this affect, the nation, investment, development, and you name it? Well, Bongo Adi joins us this morning. He's an economist and lecturer at LBS. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Mr. Adi. And I'm just wondering, first of all, did this come to you as a surprise?
Yes, actually, it was really a very shocking one. But I think I commend the CBN's courage in taking that decision. It wasn't an easy one to do. I mean, especially given the history of the development of BDCs in Nigeria. It was a highly politicized matter. So for him to take that decision, I think it requires a huge dose of courage.
It sounds like it's not something that would have been done normally, Mr. Adi. So I'm just wondering, what are the consequences of this action, first of all?
Well, so we have to look at it. This is part of the CBN's, I think, though belated, but better late than never. One of the CBN policies to sanitize the macroeconomic system, especially when we are battling with, current account deficits, because whenever you have that situation, it's definitely will impact negatively on your exchange rates. And it's not just the current account deficit. When I talk about the current account deficit, I mean that our imports seem to, be more than our exports. And then we also have budget deficit as well, which the government is struggling to fund through massive borrowing. And we have seen that. So when you put all those two double deficit together, it means that we're going to have, a huge foreign exchange devaluation. So why they have to battle with that, then you now have this round tripping going on in the BDCs. And that has been on for too long. But the consequence, of course, again, it's not just about banning them. There are so many other complementary measures that the CBN must have to judiciously and rigorously pursue to ensure that this really, generate the right impact. Otherwise, it may not work. So in 2016, when the CBN did this, that was in January 2016. Remember 2016, the year of recession. In January of that year, the CBN also banned the BDCs. Banned the sale of the dollars directly to the BDCs. Let's look at also the source where the BDC source their forex. They have the CBN. There's this limited allocation that is given to them, and I think that is what is driving this balloon in the growth of BDCs, because people are pursuing that allocation from the CBN weekly. And then they also, of course, from the open market, the people who get businesses that have their funds in foreign currencies. So a source. Then remittances. So those are the three sources by which the BDCs source their forex. Now, if CBN removes that, but you remember the reason why the CBN, the BDCs thrived is because of the constraints and then the limitation in sourcing funds for forex from the banks. The process is long, rigorous. You have to fill all manner of forms and supply all manner of requirements. That actually leads to long queues. And many people are not patient for that. And that is why the BDC, even though at a premium, was thriving. So I don't know how the CBN is going to eliminate all these, the concerns that people have raising forex from the commercial bank. That has persisted and it continues to persist. So if they are not able to make available that forex liquidity, then banning BDCs will not really lead to the desired impact. In fact, if anything, if we go by the experience of 2016, by January, the dollar was 268 naira. But by December of the same year, when BDCs were banned, we had 498. That's a depreciation of devaluation of 46%. And then the dollar rose against naira by 85%. That's massive. So if we go by that today, it means that by December this year, we may have dollar trading at over 900 naira, so that may not be good for the economy. But again, it is a step in the right direction. But it all depends on other measures the CBN needs to embark upon, to ensure that there is enough forex liquidity in the market.
Well, it'll be very interesting to find out this, how the CBN intends to go about this last one that you have just mentioned, because, I mean, Nigeria, like many nations, has to deal with, other countries of the world in business and all of that, because, there are those who believe that while it encourages bilateral trade, it also deprives the country from benefits of multilateral trade. And so if this continues, I don't know, how do you expect, what are the measures that you would suggest that the central bank should put in place?
The first thing is to, this is the time to actually deregulate completely the forex market. They should totally liberalize that market. What it means that let the dollar or naira finds its true value in the market. There shouldn't be any need for intervention. So the interventionist policies of the CBN in the past couple of years actually has meant, of course, the ordinary consumer in the market will think that because the CBN is defending the naira, therefore goods are coming cheap. But it's not helping matters, because if you look at the quantum of funds the CBN has really devoted to defending the naira, that's massive. That should have gone to provision of much needed infrastructure. And again, that would have led, reduce inflation. Inflation rising is also part of the causative factors to, high exchange rates. So, we have to look at the inflation premium. The inflation has gone to 17, 18%. I mean, because if you go to the market, actually, it's more than that. Let me just give you this. A packet, 360 grams of pig milk, just last week was 1,000 naira. If you go back to buy it today, it's 1,500 naira. So what level of inflation does that tell you? And then these are some of the staples. So that's milk. Then food prices, the same thing. So actually, because the inflation, computation uses a basket of goods, so it's kind of underestimate the level of inflation in the country right now. I can tell you that it's more than the official rate of 17%. We will be looking at something in the neighborhood of 40% actually. So what is driving? So when you have that high level of inflation, you will not expect your exchange rate to be low. So part of the reasons driving this is the constraints in supply chain, in the internal market dynamics. So which I think infrastructure would have alleviated to a certain point, whereby prices will start to come down, cost of production will be lowered. So that will help consumers ameliorate a little bit of the sufferings they are going through. So then when CBN comes with these policies, then they will actually generate the right impact. Otherwise, it will not be, those impacts, the anticipated effect will not be engendered, despite the goodwill and the good intention.
Well, just to be clear, I mean, what you've just said now, many people would resonate with. You're saying that the control measures put in place by the CBN initially before now was responsible in a way for the increase in food prices in the market. Is that correct?
Not necessarily. That's not what I'm saying, actually. But I'm saying that inflation. Okay, what is it that driving inflation? Inflation is driven by the lack of supporting infrastructure. Okay, those are indirect inputs to production. So we still have constraints in energy. We still have constraints in transportation. So many of the products, of course, we have security concerns as well. So what I'm saying is that supposing that the monies that the CBN had used in defending the naira over the years, I'm not talking about a small amount here. If that has been used actually to really invest in the real sector, we wouldn't be having, inflation would have reduced. And reduction in inflation means that exchange rate will also fall, because one of the key determinants of foreign exchange, appreciation or depreciation, is the inflation level. So we have to work that out to tell you how much inflation impacts on exchange rates. So that's just what I'm saying.
But there's also the challenge that we contend with, as a nation. We do a lot more importing than exporting. And what you are essentially talking about is if we can rear up our production capacity, we'll do a lot less importing and a lot more exporting. If that is the case, and I'm pretty sure that the CBN is not unaware of this, what should have been done or what should be done now in order for the benefits that the CBN intends to achieve by this action, is fully maximized?
Two things. The first one is deregulate the forex market. Of course, that will come with a whole lot of public uproar. But then, just as the CBN has been courageous in taking this move, I never expected this to happen under MFLA. So, I mean, that means the man is not actually what some people actually, thought. So, because if you understand the history of the evolution of BDCs, you will know that it was actually a political strategy to empower some segment of the country. It started during the time of Abdulkader Ahmed, who was the longest-serving CBN governor between 1982 and 1993. In fact, he served through Shagari all through the Buhari years up to the beginning of Sani Abacha. In fact, it was Sani Abacha that removed him. So he was there for a very long time. So he was issuing license, and the critics against him that time, one of them was that he kind of favored his own people, awarding them licenses. And that's why you see some, the BDC market dominated by certain people from a certain region of the country. So it's actually what happened then. So, now the MFLA, we know where it comes from, when into this means that it's a very courageous move. I don't know if it's going to be sustainable, understanding the economy, the politics of the day in this country. So, but if it's going to be sustained, I think he should not stop there. The next thing to do is to move into fully deregulate that market. And then when that is done, then the second move should be to ensure that people have access to forex. So how do you get off or eliminate these constraints that we have in the banks? Commercial banks, that is a major source of forex, and the CBN window, and then we have there are three sources. We have the CBN, we have the exporter, investor, and exporter window, and then we have the commercial banks. So the constraints, especially in commercial banks, need to be eliminated to ensure that there is fluid, that when people need forex, they do not have to go through so many obstacles and hurdles before they can access it. If it's accessible, then I think the policy will now begin to be at the expected impact.
Yeah, huge. I mean, just putting a figure to how much it is that the central bank has spent with the BDCs in recent times. I'm looking at the front page of the leadership here, and they say it's as much as $5.28 billion in 11 months. That's a humongous figure. But something made the CBN go down this route in the first instance, deciding to sell Forex to BDCs. Do you think at first that policy was wise in the first instance? It obviously hasn't been achieved. That's the reason why the CBN is going back to status quo ante, at least where we're coming back from. But what do you think? What are the modifications that you think will, be introduced now to make what we used to have work?
Okay, so you need to understand that we're talking about a market situation here. Rational incentives. We have this, the discrepancy in the rate. Let's go back to why the BDCs even, emerged to the level they are today. Let's go back to in the 1989 or something. So during the time of Babangida, I guess. So the official exchange rate was $22, the 22 naira to the dollar, and then in the parallel market it was 88 naira to the dollar. So what people did, it was round tripping. So that was an incentive for round tripping. People will go to the CBN, buy dollar 22 naira, and then come back and sell at the parallel market. Now that has not it disappeared. In fact, that is actually what has fueled this massive boom in BDC business. That's why everybody wants to acquire a license. If given opportunity, if I had the money, actually, I would get for the license, because that's the only way you make free money. Okay, so what does CBN do? The CBN simply fuels that speculation, because they sell at official rate, and then you come to the parallel market, and then you have that. So you cannot eliminate round tripping. You do not have the infrastructure. You do not have the enforcement mechanism to ensure that people do not do that. So rational consumers or rational sellers, what do? They look for means to get the cheap dollar from the CBN. Once they get it, They are going to the parallel market to sell it at a premium. So that's what has been happening. Now, what should the CBN do? You have to eliminate this discrepancy. Once the discrepancy doesn't exist, the BDCs will just be like any other business. Go source for your own dollar. Simple.
No, before the BDCs were even allowed to proliferate to this extent, we used to do it through the banks. It would seem that the CBN was trying to break the monopoly that the banks had, if you consider it that, by empowering the BDCs, but obviously that hasn't worked. The question is, going back to the banks, what do you think it needs to be done for the banks to be able to meet up what the CBN had in mind in the very first instance?
Okay, so first we have to, understand or scope the profile of the people who demand for FOREX. So you have FOREX demand for, paying fees abroad, like school fees, medical bills. And then you have this FOREX demand for people who are importing international businesses. And then you have a little bit of local demand as well. So now, when you look at that, what are the processes, behind each of these? So each of these processes, if you've attempted them or if you've understudied them, you will understand that they have become very cumbersome. Okay, you have to open up forms here and there. You have to fill up this, and then it takes a longer time. Now, for businesses who work, very strict timelines, that's not so convenient. And then, so that is why initially it didn't work. The commercial banks were not able to meet the demand needs of FOREX, the demand need of people. So now that the CBN has, is going back to that status quo ante, then what is required is eliminate some of this. But again, we are living in the age where there are stricter, regulatory requirements, more prudential banking systems, that you don't just give out money. You have to verify the source and make sure that it's not going into the wrong hands. So I don't see how that's going to be eliminated. So the constraint will continue to be there. So the impact eventually, if we have to be pragmatic, it means that we will actually have higher, more depreciation of the naira, just like what happened in 2016, because that's just the only thing we can hang on to. By December, we'll have, if you have a 46% depreciation, that means that if you have, if it is 500 naira to the dollar now, you will be having something in the nearing 900 or 900 and something to the dollar.
Very, very scary figures which you're reading out there. But, Mr. Emefiele was also spitting some fire yesterday when he said, we're going to deal with them ruthlessly and we'll report to international bodies. Now, he was talking about banks who are allowing illegal Forex dealers use their platforms. And when he says we're going to deal with them ruthlessly, what sort of... because some people are also thinking as a result of what has happened, the kind of allegations leveled against BDCs. First, do you think that any action will come out of this? I mean, aside the ban, or those who are processing and also the ban on Forex to BDCs, do you think that there should be any extra action? I mean, because these allegations have not come from thin air, one would imagine that there has been some investigation and some people have been found wanting. Should there be some... punishment, penalties, it will seem, to the erring BDCs, and the measures being spelled out to the banks right now. Do you think it will be of any effect?
To answer you simply, it will be of no consequence. Why? People respond to rational incentives. And let's also begin to unpack the BDC system, okay? You will understand that the CBN itself is a sort of, I have to be, let me just wear my academic hat here. The CBN has operated a crony system. Government, or, what you call CBN of the cronies, for the cronies, by the cronies. So that is the way it has worked. Most of the people who operate the BDCs are somehow linked to the CBN. Okay, so you have this insider issue. Okay, so most people who get the license, you can't even get the license except you have some contacts at some high level at the CBN. So I know, we know this for a fact. So given this situation, now this carrot and stick approach will not work. The only thing that can work is let the market drive it. As far as you leave a room for some bit of round tripping or for people to play game the system, they will do that. It's not a matter of threatening them with fire and brimstone. It will not work. Just let the market determine the exchange rate. That's a simple thing. If we're able to do that, then Naira will find its natural level. You will immediately eliminate the BDCs. It's not about threats.
How sustainable is that, considering just how fragile our current forex reserves are? How wise will it be? And, the CBN's primary duty of trying to rein in inflation, how wise will it be for them to just let go and float the Naira?
Yeah, I think we have to, again, I have to go back to theory. Of course, theory, there's always an exception to every rule. The theory, if you want, the J-curve of the exchange rate, the J-curve goes this way, that when you deregulate or liberalize the foreign exchange rate, for the first few months, it could go to a year or so, maybe 12 to 18 months, you will now have a deep dive where it will actually plunge or plummet. Then eventually it begins to normalize, and then by that time the system would have adjusted and begins to appreciate. So that is something that we need to put into consideration. And then there is something else the CBN did in 2016, which I commend them for, which is opening up. They started to sell the bills, the OMO, bills to foreigners and institutional investors and foreign investors. So that actually helped them to ameliorate that the stringent condition imposed by the elimination or banning of BDCs. But it wasn't enough. It didn't stop Naira from falling from 268 or rising from 268 to 495 in 2016. But if they can do more of that, and remove so many other constraints that we know about, with people trying to import, especially repatriate capital, then maybe something could be achieved. But we cannot continue to postpone the evil day. Okay, so let's take that nasty decision, which will impose some bit of momentary hardship. We're already there. So. And hope that the complementary policies will also take effect, so that over time, maybe in less than 18 months, it normalizes, and then we'll be fine.
All right. So, Dr. Adi, one question comes to my mind about this. You talked about the sustainability of this initiative by the CBN. On the one hand, one looks at the short-term benefits, and then one looks at the long-term benefit, or rather long-term pro or con. I don't know which of the hats is going to fit in here, whether it's your economic hat or your lecturer hat. So you may want to wear any one of them to kindly answer this question. In terms of sustainability, what are the short-term benefits, and what are the short-term cons? What are the long-term benefits, if any, and what are the demerits, if any, in the long term?
Very, very, very good question. The first one is, of course, the CBN is trying to rein in or kind of, optimize the control of the exchange rate. Of course, you look at we are in a very high inflationary phase. Currently, as I've mentioned, the double deficit, current account deficit, and the fiscal deficit. So the CBN is, and then we are borrowing heavily. So this is a point where the CBN really needs to be on top of things. Okay. So what it means is that they will need to bring everything within their coffers and not allowing all of this speculation. So that is in the short run. What we're seeing is the CBN's ability to really determine, control or manage the exchange rate, because they shouldn't even be controlling it. I don't want to use that word, but that is what they always like to do. But if they can manage it, then that will be fine. So, because they now have, remember, we have high debt servicing rate. I think saying that 98 kobo out of every naira is now using debt servicing or so. And then our revenue is we are the revenue, the lowest, poorest revenue to GDP in the whole world. So so these are very huge challenges to the central bank. And eventually I've started talking about that even in classes and in my writings, that macroeconomic policies have become neutral. They're no longer effective, so it doesn't really matter what they do. We don't feel it in the real market. Everybody can bear witness to that. But okay, so this is I think this is an effort to ensure that they bring back that oversight power to the CBN, that their macroeconomic policies will begin to be felt in the real market.
Dr. Adi, just 1 second. You talked about some of the pros of the short term, but we need to take a few messages now. When we return, you tell us the other side of this short term and the conclusion of the long term pros or cons. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. Well, we're talking about the CBN's ban of BDCs and the short-term, long-term effects and all of that. How does this concern you? Well, Dr. Bongo Hadi is still with us. He's an economist and a lecturer at LBS. Well, so, Doc, you were talking about some of the short-term benefits or, cons and the long-term pros and cons. You stopped at the point of talking about the short-term benefits. Are there anything that we should be cautious of in the short term?
Well, in the short term, definitely we have to deal with more loss of value in the naira. So meaning that I don't know what it is this morning, but I think it's in the neighborhood of 505 for naira to the dollar. So we will expect more of that such devaluation going forward. That's a necessary evil. It will keep happening until eventually maybe things normalize. Now, what is it that drives the exchange rate, by the way? There are some politics about this, so I don't want to go into that, the political economy and all those conspiracy theories, not really conspiratorial as such, but we need to improve our export ability, okay? Improving the export ability means that, logistics situation, the distribution network needs to be addressed, and then that includes transportation, that includes energy. So infrastructure is still a key. So if we're able to build those enabling infrastructure, and then we look at the port infrastructure, both the soft and the hard infrastructure at the port, so that it's easy for people to export. So once we're able to key back into the global value chain and then diversify our export, then perhaps we begin to earn some bit of more diversified revenue apart from oil, because that's all that's driving this whole thing. So this, what we're talking about here again, is what I think Pat Utomi is always talking about, our focus on revenue rather than production. So this is one of those revenue policies, revenue focus policies. How do we manage limited revenue rather than thinking of how do we expand production? If production is expanded, and then I think CBN has tried to play some good role in expanding the productive base of the economy. But they've done that by issuing, all of these soft loans they've been giving to people, which I think is not properly monitored, is not properly evaluated, meaning that at the end of the day, it could be the case that we do not get the expected impact. Supposing that they can maybe change the mechanism through which that allocation is done, I don't think even the CBN needs to be involved in that. Maybe this should fully be commercialized. Work with a combination of commercial banks and the consultants, leading consulting firms, even LBS, so that these things can be properly administered. Then there will be real accountability. Then eventually we begin to expand the productive base of the economy, even if we don't target to export to the rest of the world, but we can export to the rest of Africa. Now that will improve our export profile. So with that, this pressure, limited revenue, FOREX revenue, so to speak, we begin to ameliorate. Okay. Now, if that doesn't happen, so we are still, everything, this policy is about protecting what we have, the revenue that comes from oil, not about expanding the capacity of the economy to export, which is the only thing. In fact, it is that last when you talk about the GDP identity, which we say GDP is equal to consumption plus investment plus government expenditure plus net export, that is export minus import. Now, the most important determinant of what happens in an economy is that external sector component, which is the current account, export minus import. If you export, definitely your exchange rate will begin to appreciate. If you are importing more than you are exporting, you will be in our situation. That is the real thing that needs to be addressed. The external sector. How do we export? How do we make our economy competitive? How do we gain some share of the export market? If we don't do that, then all these policies are just, after all, monetary policies in the long run are neutral.
Well, Dr. Bongadi, what you have just said now, for me, it's very, very interesting that we're even talking about improving the production capacity and export capability of the country. So I'm wondering how this policy will affect or encourage micro, small, and medium enterprises in particular. Because, many have complained about the need for us to improve production capacity. So I'm just wondering, with this position of the CBN, what other system in government at the federal level or at the state level ought to work in tandem with this policy in order for us to to milk the advantages or opportunities, the pros that you have talked about? CBN has taken this decision, but then it's not supposed, it's just one in a pool of activities in the economy. So what other infrastructure of government, what other ministries, departments, or agencies, what other things need to be done by who in order to be able to milk the pros, the advantages, the merits of this policy of the CBN?
Very brilliant intervention you've got there. Now, that is the real question, okay? CBN has done more than enough, has taken even more than, I think it's beaten off more than it could chew, simply because the other arms of government, the other components of the infrastructure of governance are not working, okay? So CBN begins to now see itself and over-expand. It has done enough. Exactly, what's going on in my mind, and then you brought it up. You see, when it comes to growth, when it comes to building export capability, we are now talking about global value chains. And then when we talk about global value chains, we are now trying to key into ownership of capital. We do not own capital. We do not own technology. So meaning that we have to somehow negotiate with the owners. Now, who is it that intervenes? Who is it that leads the way? It is the government. Okay, we have these cases. For instance, there are countries in Asia, whether the Japanese or the Koreans or the Chinese. You understand how they relate with global capital. They will send a delegation that will go to meet and sit with some of these global big businesses. They negotiate conditions for them to come into their country, conditions for them to invest, and then give them all manner of concessions. Government takes the leading role. Even in Africa, back home here, so I don't need to go to China and all of those places. Paul Kagame, until recently, was every day in Nigeria. What was Paul Kagame doing? Paul Kagame was wooing Nigerian investors, Nigerian businessmen and women to come to Kigali. And today you have very strong Nigerian presence in the Rwandan economy. Okay. Now, what has that led to? You will now see Rwanda is the most the fastest growing and the most advanced African economy in the space of less than a decade because of Paul Kagame's proactive pursuit of growth. We even here, when you listen to somebody like P2B talk, you will learn what he did, to revitalize the economy of Anambra State. He took the leading steps. He went out, he traveled abroad, he was meeting with multinationals and wooing them, giving them all manner of concessions to come to invest in Anambra State. Now, we have not seen that with this current government. The presidency is all about, rebuffing attacks and then, things that are not important, that don't matter. And eventually, there wasn't the situation. So I think the CBN has done much. Now the onus is on the other arms of government, especially the presidency, the presidency should take the lead, and then all the ministers, okay, should begin to look at how to woo investors into the various sectors. That is not happening. It is still about this production of revenue. Everybody is worried about sharing formula, okay, of a disappearing pie. Nobody is interested in growing the pie. I think that is why we are locked into this mess.
Well, and certainly, unless we improve capacity, it will seem like the pie is just going to get smaller by the day. God forbid. Well, Dr. Bongo Adi, we have to thank you very much for your conversation with us this morning. He is an economist as well as a lecturer at LBS. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts on this issue.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Well, there is so much to talk about, and the question now is, how do you get involved? We'll be back for that.